Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We are going to wrap up this week with a bit of a bonus episode. There's still the album review later on tonight, but last week ago, 2 weeks ago, I don't remember, man, we did a theme called Whatever, where I asked my patrons just to send me in whatever requests they wanted. No overarching theme to this selection. And I only got to two of those because I got sick that week and I could not finish out the rest of the reactions. So we're still wrapping that up. Today we're going to be checking out one of those selections. This is from a group called Amplifier. We're going to look at the song Airborne off of the Amplifier album. Now, I have no idea what this is going to be about. I've never heard of this group. I can't really tell much from the album art. All we can do is dive in. So let's do that and see what Amplifier is bringing to the table today. Very atmospheric. We have some almost clipping at times, but I think the reverb has more control over the feeling of this atmosphere than the clipping does. Okay, yeah, very cool. I honestly don't know if that's a guitar or a synthesizer. There's definitely some sort of filter being put on it and modulated, regardless of what it is. That's definitely a guitar, though, I think. Has a nice... Yeah, it has a really nice attack to it that reminds me of a pick on a string. It's kind of moody, there's a little bit of darkness to it, but it's also very freeing, very wide open. I don't know if fast is the word I would use, but certainly showcasing potential. Okay, so the opening kind of gave me some early Tool vibes, but the vocalist also kind of leans into that. I like that pattern on the drums. I wonder when this came out. I'm getting like a late 90s vibe. 2004. Okay. A little later than I was expecting. And the way that opens up, yeah. aggressive bass tone, but like distorted Evo usage. Lots of tension. No resolution in that chord progression. And the continuing to rise pitch. And a descent both in the song falling apart, but also a lot of the pitches bending down. Oh, that's... okay. Yeah. The drummer following along with the accent pattern of the guitarist. Interesting, no choice. Oh, interesting sonic choices. Instead of just allowing that final pitch with all the guitars and the bass and all that to ring out and just naturally decay there, it just cuts all of it out for this single chirping sound. I mean, speaking of that chirping sounds, I think the first thing we really need to talk about here is sonic choices, the overall sound of this. I'd even say the language of this song, primarily focusing in on the production of the song, not just from the engineering side, but also from the guitarist and bassist and what kind of tones they're wanting to use with their instruments. A lot of this song, by the end of the track, I'm pretty convinced we just have a couple of guitars, a bass, and a drum kit. But honestly, at the beginning of the song, like I said, I was kind of 50-50 on it. Are they guitars or are they synthesizers? And I mean, I guess there's still a chance that there is a synth somewhere in here, but like I said, I'm pretty convinced there's at least a core rock band somewhere in this song, even if that means that maybe there is a synth alongside it. But what stands out to me the most right off the bat, these guitars don't sound like guitars, at least not in the traditional way that rock guitars tend to sound. They do have bite, they do have compression, they do have distortion, they are overdriven, they have reverb on them. These are all pretty typical, but it's everything else. It's actually about the modulation of the sound. It makes me wonder how they do it live. I know guitarists, when they create pedal boards, that they can put, uh, yeah, pedal, right? A foot pedal on it. And those can control stuff like volume and wah and all sorts of stuff. I assume that you could probably put some sort of filter or modulating, I don't know, effect on it. No different than putting a wah effect on it. And that could help you do it live. Because, I mean, it's not like they're not playing riffs. They don't just strum something out and then go over to, like, a bunch of knobs nearby and play. I mean, they're constantly playing riffs on these guitars, but the sounds are getting top heavy and then sort of morphing down to bottom heavy. And there's a little bit of panning and waviness to it. I feel like the reverb changes from time to time. There's also some sort of, I'd say, extra compression or even a volume boost. I mentioned at the beginning that it kind of moves into and out of clipping too, which is when the volume of the sound is too hot or too loud going into whatever the next piece is, and some of the information gets lost in that process. In fact, overdrive is a type of controlled clipping, and this takes that to the next level. I don't know what the chain looks like. I don't know, the instrument goes into these things, goes into that things, go into the cabinet and the amp. Like I don't know the series that they would have for all of this. But I would assume that at some point there's overdrive going into something and then that level is controlled volume wise, but then somewhere down the chain they do more clipping on top of that at times, and there's some sort of probably a volume control somewhere for that too. And there's just so much modification that you just don't hear too often in the realm of rock and metal, particularly because, your guitarists are usually, their hands are busy, so they can't play around with knobs. And you only have one foot really that can do pedals. Your other foot you need to balance on. So even if you have a series of four pedals or something set up for different parameters, you can't control them like this, and that's what gives it a very digital sound. And like I said, maybe it's all done in post, but then how do you do this live? Maybe it's all automated. It would be like a backing track, but instead of syncing up with the backing track, you're syncing up with automated parameter adjustments. That, I mean, you get out of sync with a backing track, that gets spicy too, but this could get real spicy if you get out of sync with the modifications and their automation. I don't know. I'm just really amazed by all of that. It gives the song a very specific vibe. Granted, yes, a lot of the atmosphere to this, the groove to it, I'd even say the vocalist, there's a lot of Tool inspiration going on here. And, let me know if you agree or disagree with that. Maybe I'm a little off with this. Maybe I'm thinking of something else entirely. I hear some Tool in this, though. But what steps it up is it feels like Tool played by electronic musicians. Yeah, they happen to have guitars. They have a drum and a vocalist, but the way that everything is produced feels very much like they come from an electronic background and came into the realm of rock music. And that gives it a very specific taste. And I think it's a very cool idea too, because rock slash metal and electronic have been coming together for a decade and a half now. We're really seeing it happen a lot. Anytime that you listen to pretty much anything in the mainstream or alternative metal realms, you're going to hear electronic sounds, keyboards, synthesizers with metal. But this is a very different take. This is merging electronic and metal on a production level, not on a instrumental level, not on a timbre level. What if we took the production techniques that go into creating an interesting electronic track and just put those techniques in a rock track? And don't get me wrong, I like where alternative metal is right now. I like where modern metalcore is. That stuff sounds great. But I kind of wish that we had split paths here and we had gone through two different iterations of how do we combine electronic and metal music. Because I would love for more of today's metal to have taken cues from what Amplifier is doing right here. Or even modern rock, too. You listen to modern rock and there's synthesizers and a lot electronic production. There's glitch. There's overproduction, what people would probably call, and more use of pitch correction and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of elements of electronic music and pop music that have made their way into rock and metal. I feel like this would have been a really cool parallel to the idea of adding synthesizers and glitch and high fidelity production to these genres. I don't want to sit on this topic anymore. I feel like I could talk about it a lot, but we need to get on to some other ideas here, and I feel like for the most part, without getting into details, I've pretty much exhausted the core concepts here. So this is going to take us to what's being played rather than what's being produced. The bass. Sounds sick. Some great bass lines in here. Sometimes they're following along with the guitars. Sometimes they're doing their own thing. I love that. It reminds me of Tool. Again, Tool's bassist is definitely one who understands when they need to line up with things and create a unified sound, and when they can split off and do their own thing. And they have a meaty sounding bass in their group too. I hear a lot of that here. The bass gets some time to shine, they get some time to sort of sit in the background while doing their own thing, and they know when to bring it all together, when to unify on like a rhythmic idea or a melodic idea in order to fully support that concept. But I think what stands out the most to me is the drum work. It isn't on the surface super complex. We're definitely not hearing Tool level polyrhythms going on here. But it does feel more melodic than I expect rock of especially the mid 2000s. You know, this was the rise of nu metal and big forms of alternative rock, really kind of taking the rock sound and pushing more towards atmospheric ideas and vibe. Honestly, a lot of modern pop music is about vibe, but I think rock was really nailing this in the 2000s when pop music was about hooks and catchiness and overproduction, trying to put as much into the sound as possible, as opposed to, modern day we're kind of swinging back a little bit towards that maximalist side, but we've been in a very minimal element of pop music lately. And like I said, rock was doing this vibe-based stuff back in the 2000s, before pop was decided to start checking that out. And so the drum work around this era, when I think of radio rock in particular, which this I think could have appeared on the radio, I think it lines up atmospherically and even sonically with a lot of music of the time. Maybe it was just that they weren't that popular. They only have 8,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. I don't think Spotify was around in 2005 though. No, I'm pretty sure it wasn't actually. So yeah, maybe these numbers are just not completely accurate to the time, but I'm curious. I've never heard of them. Maybe the other thing is that I'm an American and maybe they aren't, and maybe their sound just never got imported over into the US's radio libraries. But yeah, I could hear them clear as day. on the radio. It's just like it's a perfect sound for the time, and they're doing something fresh and new while not pushing too far outside of the realms of what was going on. So, yeah. Anyways, I'm getting a little off topic here. The drum work, though, vibe-based rock at the time, really not pushing the boundaries. A lot of it is sitting in the pocket, hitting that groove, being chill, right? Especially for this type of music. Granted, we still had like hard rock at the time, more intense drum stuff going on. But as far as this sort of groove, atmospheric stuff, the drums typically laid back. They sat into the groove and just laid down that rhythm for you to, headbang to or whatever. The drummer here does that 100%. There's really not a lot of moments where they feel like they're stealing the spotlight. There's not a lot of wild, intense fills going on here. But you know what is going on? Underneath the surface, some really cool melodic drumming. I love listening to the patterns of the drum, hearing particularly how the snare and bass kick dance around each other. Because for a lot of drum work, you tend to figure out, where are my snare accents? Is it going to be every beat? Is it going to be 2 and 4? Is it going to be 1 and 3? And then you base your kick around that. Do you want a straightforward beat where maybe you alternate? Snare on 2 and 4, bass on 1 and 3. Do you want something a bit bouncier and jumpier? Maybe something a bit punkier or post-hardcore? You're going to syncopate the bass kick. Sometimes it'll be on downbeats. Sometimes it'll be on offbeats, which it creates different rhythmic pulses between your bass and your snare. Sometimes they're a full beat apart, sometimes they're half a beat apart, sometimes they're a beat and a half apart. And this syncopation creates the grooviness, it creates a bounciness. That approach doesn't really apply here, and I love it. It's kind of difficult for me to follow along with what the drummer is doing. Again, nothing super flashy. At best, quarter notes and eighth notes. That's it. A lot of it is based around syncopation, but also around patterns. There was one section throughout here. It was a 2-bar phrase. So we're looking at 8 beats. And something pretty straightforward on the first half, the first bar. But on the second bar, we start playing with groups of 2. So it'll be like 2 bass kicks, 2 snare hits, a bass and a snare, and then I don't know, like 2 more bass hits or something like that. Doom, doom, dum, dum, doom, dum, dum, dum. And this is just straight eighth notes right here. But it's done in such a playful way, and it's done outside of the realm of basically focus on accent points. It focuses on the fluidity of the idea itself. That's exactly how melodic drumming tends to work. Now, we only have 2 notes here. It doesn't really feel melodic, but it approaches the drum pattern with that same perspective. Not one of groove and rhythm, but one of, for lack of a better word, of melody, of trying to figure out the smoothness between all of these hits. I love that. It is very cool. And as you listen to the drums more and more throughout here, you can see so many different patterns going on. The drummer has such a blast basically laying out these little ornamental licks for the drum kit and puts them in places all over, just kind of peppers them throughout the song. And it's such a refreshing way to build a drum groove. There are certainly sections of this song that lean into more of a metronomic style playing to really lock into a beat and sit there. But when I think of passages of this song, when I think of what would probably be the fills throughout this song, I think of these really interesting, more melodically driven fills or patterns. And I enjoyed every time I locked into the drums. I was like, hey, what you doing back there? Something interesting, more often than not. And I find that to be very cool. Now the guitar gives us riffs. For me, it's kind of a mix. There's definitely some chordal based stuff here. The chord progression in the chorus is mostly chord progression, but we do have riffs throughout here. It's kind of tough to hear them for me sometimes because the production definitely steals the spotlight. Listening to how the sound of the guitar is modulating and morphing typically grabs my attention more than the moving melodic idea underneath that. It does exist. I picked up on a few of them, but I don't know, something about the shifting sound of the guitar always caught my attention more. And I was so intrigued by that, probably because I don't know how that works. Whereas when I'm listening to the riff, I'm like, oh yeah, it's a pretty cool riff. I dig it, right? Cool, really cool stuff. And if I listen to it a couple times, I could probably learn it by ear. But with the production stuff, that's just, it's so outside of my wheelhouse. I have no idea how they're doing that. And so that I think is just going to catch my attention more. But there's cool riffs, but what I want to focus on is chord progressions. We start off the song with this long, reverby instrumental bit. And I mentioned that it felt large, but not vast. But I think the word I used was full of potential or something along those lines. That absolutely fits, though. I love that. And we actually see more of this towards the end of the song. There's the moment where the verses feel kind of rooted. They're a bit more physical. They're a bit less potentially, less vast, less open-ended. They feel grounded in a way. But they also feel tense, like a spring that you've compressed down, waiting to be released so it can launch away. That's what the verses feel like to me. And there is this one chorus, I don't think it was the first one, but I think it was the second one. We moved into it, and the guitarist stopped playing the riffs and went to this chord progression. And production-wise, it felt big. I don't know what happened, because I still heard two guitars, bass, drums, vocals. I don't know if it was, well, it wasn't a volume boost. I was watching the volume meters. So I don't know, maybe it was a production trick. Maybe we layered up some of the guitars to make them feel beefier, to take up more space. I don't know. It felt big though. And the chord progression continued to rise. It felt like the spring, like the takeoff. We finally let go of it and the spring sprung. I have such a way with words, don't I? But that's what it felt like. It felt like a takeoff almost. And the song's called Airborne. Maybe that's influencing some of my interpretation here. And like I mentioned, we continued to rise in pitch. And it felt like we were continuing to go up. But there was no release of tension here. Every chord that came next, I think might have even had more tension. Some of them were the same tension, some are more. But I really expected, root tone, tension, tension. The fourth one should be resolution, right? Nope, that was also tension. Okay, we're going to go home now? No, we don't loop back down and hit the home. We rise up again for more tension. And then right after this is when the song falls apart. We have the bending notes on the strings. The drums just kind of have like clattering of drumsticks on the kit itself. Not necessarily, hitting the snare drum or something like that, but just like setting the sticks down on their side, kind of getting that clattering sound of things hitting. We had strings bending. We had just downward pitch ideas. And the song kind of falls apart there. And then we have sort of this tense, somber ending. Kind of takes us out there until we get to the very end, where I was expecting a fade out, and instead it just wipes all the big sounds out, and we just have that one like nasally, small, teeny sound. To me, of course, I feel a lot of tension before takeoff, a launch, and then a falling back down. Something going wrong, that's all the rising tension. Knowing that this flight, this takeoff, whatever that might mean metaphorically, isn't working well. And realizing that this is not going to end the way that it should. And of course, inevitably, the song falls apart, and this would be the disaster that strikes. I'm not too sure about the ending, unless it's just like Broken Dreams or something like that. This was their only chance to do this, and now they don't have the funds or the patience or the time, maybe. We could be looking at like a 70-year-old person wanting to live this final dream and knowing that they don't have the time to give it another shot and that this was a failure or something like that, and sort of feeling down about that. I don't know, that's my general take on the song though. I think they do a fantastic job crafting the atmosphere of all of this, building all of these feelings, and I love the production on this. It's just a very interesting take of merging electronic and rock that honestly makes a lot of sense. We just didn't go that route when the world decided to merge electronic and rock over the past couple of decades. All right, let me dive into some lyrics on this, see what's going on there. All right, I get some of this, and I think we can apply the more figurative idea of compression and launch and disaster to some of the lyrics here. It seems to be about somebody who is trying to take on darkness, which again itself might be a metaphor. It talks about black-handed days. It talks about evil being on a throne, that hearts are blacker than setting suns. Basically, that things aren't great. And by the end of the song, well, by the end of the lyrics, which I think is right before the takeoff, right as we're growing in intensity and pitch, he says, I'm glowing for you, so try to prove me wrong. And this idea of finding potential within yourself and proving to the world that this is who you are. Now, interestingly, after that, musically, we have disaster and then a somber, tense ending. So, you know, that might speak a little bit to what happens, the conclusion of this story, but at least lyrically, it ends on a high point. So that generally works for me. But there's a lot of what I'm going to call gong style lyrics on here, which sound great, but they kind of don't mean much. He says, "Hey, Mr. Dog, I'm just an animal, just like you." Got a double just in there. He says, "I'm just an animal just like you, in a laser beam, and a human being, yeah? With more fire than the belly of the sun." Now, part of me wants to read this as a typo. I originally read it with more fire in my belly than the sun. But when I went back and saw it again, I was like, no, it says with more fire than the belly of the sun. What does that mean? Like, I get the gist of it, but there is a clearer statement that is there just by changing a couple of words around. What does it mean to be an animal in a laser beam and a human being? Again, I'm a little lost on some of this. He says, "And inside this business of the gun, well, I heard the aero engines whine of a lucky soul and an afterlife and another chance for a darker life." Again, I'm a little lost here. We certainly have ideas of being launched, whether that's a bullet out of a gun or the idea of hearing aero engines, airplane engines, I'm going to assume. This idea of taking off for flight, which captures the concept of airborne in a figurative way. He says, "It doesn't take God long to bless those feet that you're standing on a one-way ride, a heaven vibe. Upon wishes or demands, it's time to fly." I don't quite understand all of it, particularly the idea of God blessing feet that allow you to have a one-way ride, not to heaven, but a ride that is a heaven vibe. I don't get that. But he says that it is time to fly. If you have wishes or demands to fly, it's time to do that. That part I do get. And this is where things start to turn into being a force against darkness. He says, "I'm suffering the absolute of black-handed days. I've been serving with the boys and the girls, all the secret rulers of the world, and dark day alive. Well, once again, evil is on the throne, hearts blacker than the setting sun, but I've hung up dark feathers." So there is this dark regime, evil on the throne, and he was a part of that army. He said, I served with the boys and the girls for the secret rulers of the world. He was part of this dark cabal. He's like, I've hung up those dark feathers. I no longer fly for that anymore, but it's still time for me to fly. He says, now my intentions are so high and I've been hanging in there. My intentions, they're purer than air. So I'll be glowing from you. Go ahead and prove me wrong. This idea of switching sides and taking on who you used to work for because you see them as a dark oppressor and hanging up your dark feathers to be glowingly airborne now. I like most of what this song's doing. I think it's a very cool little narrative here. The metaphors I think work well, but there's still some language in here that goes right over my head. I don't understand how it works in isolation, much less with everything else that the song is exploring. But I do think that it works well. I was talking about a type of tension of being, land bound before launching. You can't, leave the earth without being on the earth first, whether that's jumping or taking off in an airplane or launching a rocket. It doesn't matter. You have to start on the ground to leave the ground. That's what I got out of the beginning, but I think that the opening tension is supposed to be about this person's history, the dark tasks that they've gone through in the past, and some of the things that they might not be so proud of anymore, which is why they're changing sides. And that the release isn't so much just about being airborne, it isn't just about finding your potential, but about doing something for good now and trying to, clean your ledger a little bit. So I kind of dig that. I'm very confused about some of these lines, though. So, really odd phrases in the beginning of this track, but that also gives it a little bit of its charm. These are my thoughts on Amplifier's Airborne. What are yours? Did you enjoy this? Did anything stand out to you? Is there anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you have your own interpretation of things. Please put all of that and any other thoughts you have down into the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today. Well, at least for this right now. As I said, we do have an album review later on tonight. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC. We'll have a live stream. Goes for about 2.5 hours. Chit chat about all sorts of stuff. Usually music related, but we deviate. It's just a chill time. There's no agenda really, other than to listen to somewhere between 10 and 12 tracks of music. Light analysis, mostly just chilling, chatting, and checking out some good tunes. It is a blast. If you can make it, I highly suggest dropping by. Otherwise, though, Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard, as usual, I'll be back with some more reactions. Alright, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.